The rifle trembled in Sarah's grip as she pressed her back against the barn wall, listening to the heavy footsteps circling outside. Through the gaps in the weathered wood, she could see the shadow of a man, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the deliberate patience of someone who knew cornered prey had nowhere to run. Behind her, pressed into the hay like scared rabbits, her 3 younger siblings held their breath. Tommy, barely 8, clutched his wooden horse so tight his knuckles had gone white. The twins, Mary and Martha, 6 years old, and mirror images of fear, buried their faces in Sarah's torn skirt. "I know you're in there," came the voice from outside, deep, weathered by years of calling across open range. "Saw the smoke from your fire 3 miles out." Sarah closed her eyes. Stupid. So stupid to light that fire, but little Martha had been shivering something fierce, and the November cold had teeth that bit clean through their thin blankets. 4 days they had been hiding in this abandoned barn, living off the half loaf of bread and jar of preserves they had managed to grab before. The footsteps stopped. "Your pa's horse is in my stable," the voice continued, closer now. "Been there 2 weeks. Figured someone might come looking." Sarah's breath caught. 2 weeks. That meant he knew. Somehow, this stranger knew exactly how long Papa had been gone, knew exactly when their world had crumbled into dust and desperation. The barn door creaked. A shaft of late afternoon light cut through the darkness, and with it stepped a man Sarah had only glimpsed from a distance, Marcus Kane, owner of the sprawling Circle K ranch that bordered their small homestead. His hat cast his face in shadow, but she could see enough. Weathered hands that had seen decades of hard work. A coat that had cost more than her family spent on supplies in a year. Eyes that seemed to take in everything. At once. He saw them immediately. 4 children huddled in the corner like wounded animals. His gaze lingered on Sarah's face, taking in the hollow cheeks, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she held that rifle like it was all that stood between her family and the grave. "How long since you've eaten?" he asked quietly. Sarah's finger found the trigger. "Stay back." Kane stopped, raised his hand slightly. "Not here to hurt you, girl. Just asking a question." The silence stretched between them like a rope pulled taut. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, could feel Tommy's small body shaking against her leg. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the gaps in the barn walls, with a sound like distant mourning. Kane's eyes moved from her face to the children behind her, and something shifted in his expression. Something that might have been recognition, or memory, or pain. "All 4 of you," he said finally, his voice so low it was almost a whisper. "Get in." Sarah's mind reeled. Get in? Get in what? Her eyes darted past Kane's imposing figure to the open barn door, where she could just make out the edge of something large and dark. A wagon. He'd brought a wagon. "No," she whispered, but the word came out cracked and weak. Behind her, she could feel the children stirring, hope and terror warring in their small bodies. Kane took a careful step forward, his hands still raised. "Your pa owes me money, girl. Has for 3 months now. But that's not why I'm here." The rifle wavered in Sarah's grip. 3 months. That was when Papa had started disappearing for days at a time, coming home with whiskey on his breath and wild stories about strikes and claims and money that was just around the corner. 3 months since Mama had died of the fever, and their small world had started its slow collapse. "Found him in Deadwood," Kane continued, his voice gentle as breaking glass. "Table stakes got too high, and he bet the homestead. Lost it to a man named Briggs." Sarah's knees nearly buckled. The homestead. Gone. The only home these children had ever known. The place where Mama was buried under the old oak tree, where Tommy had taken his first steps, where the twins had been born during that terrible winter storm. "Briggs is coming," Kane said. "Tomorrow, maybe the day after. He's not the patient type." "Then why—" Sarah's voice broke. She swallowed hard, forced herself to continue. "Why are you here? Why help us?" Kane was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. Through the barn door, Sarah could hear his horses shifting restlessly, the leather of their harness creaking in the wind. "Had a daughter once," he said finally. "About your age. Maybe a little younger." Had. Past tense. Sarah saw the weight of that single word settle across Kane's shoulders, like a mantle made of grief. Tommy whimpered softly, and Mary reached out to touch Sarah's arm. "Sarah, I'm hungry," she whispered, so quiet it was barely breath. Kane heard it anyway. His jaw tightened, and when he spoke again, there was something harder in his voice, something that brooked no argument. There's food in the wagon, blankets, a place to sleep that's got walls and a roof and a fire that won't give you away to every drifter and claim jumper between here and Montana. Sarah looked down at her siblings, really looked at them, Tommy's ribs showing through his thin shirt, the twins' faces pale and gaunt, their eyes too big for their heads. When was the last time any of them had had a proper meal? When was the last time they'd slept without one ear listening for trouble? "What do you want in return?" she asked, because nothing in this world came free, and men like Cain didn't help people like them without son. Cain's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been surprise or respect or sorrow. "We'll figure that out," he said. The wind gusted again, and through the gaps in the barn walls, Sarah could see storm clouds building on the horizon, dark and heavy and full of the kind of rain that would soak through their thin clothes and turn their small shelter into a misery of cold and damp. Behind Cain, his horses whickered softly, and Sarah realized with a start that she could smell food, real food, bread and meat and something else that made her empty stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. The rifle dropped an inch in her grip. Cain saw it and nodded once, as if she'd made some decision he'd been waiting for. "Time to choose, girl," he said quietly. "My wagon, or whatever's coming behind Briggs when he gets here." Sarah never got the chance to answer. The thunder of hoofbeats cut through the evening air like gunshots, coming fast and hard from the direction of the main road. Cain's head snapped toward the sound, his hand dropping instinctively to the Colt at his hip. "Down," he hissed, motioning toward the children. "All of you, down in that hay, and don't make a sound." Sarah grabbed Tommy and the twins, pulling them deeper into the shadows as the riders approached. Through a crack in the barn wall, she could see them. 5 men on lathered horses, their faces hard and hungry. The man in front wore a black hat with a silver band, and his coat was the kind of fine wool that spoke of money and violence in equal measure. Briggs. It had to be. Cain stepped outside the barn, and Sarah heard his boots crunch on the gravel. She pressed her eye to the gap in the wood, watching as he faced down the 5 riders with nothing but steady nerves and the gun on his hip. "Evening, gentlemen," Cain said, his voice carrying that same quiet authority Sarah had heard in the barn. "You're on my land." Briggs dismounted slowly, his spurs singing against the ground. "Cain." The name came out like he was tasting something sour. "Heard you might know something about some missing children." "Children?" Cain's voice was mild, conversational. "What children would those be?" 4 of them. Belonged to a man named Henderson, man who owed me a considerable debt." Briggs stepped closer, and Sarah could see the gun at his hip, could see the way his men spread out in a loose semicircle behind him. Debt that's now transferred to his offspring. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Transferred to his offspring. They weren't just homeless, they were collateral, property to be collected and sold to cover their father's gambling debts. "Henderson's children are under my protection," Cain said simply. Briggs laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Your protection? That's mighty generous of you, Cain. Mighty expensive, too. You know what 4 healthy children are worth in the right markets?" The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Sarah felt Tommy trembling against her side, felt the twins' small hands clutching at her dress. Through the gap in the wall, she could see Cain's hand resting easily near his gun. But there were 5 of them, and only one of him. "I know what they're worth to me," Cain said quietly. Briggs drew his gun. It happened so fast, Sarah almost missed it. The whisper of steel on leather, the metallic click of a hammer being pulled back. But Cain was faster. His Colt appeared in his hand like magic, the barrel steady as stone and pointed directly at Briggs's chest. "You boys might want to think about this," Cain said, his voice still mild, still conversational. "I've got good cover here, and you're sitting pretty in the open. My foreman's probably watching us through a rifle scope right about now. How many of you reckon you can drop before he puts you in the GR?" "Ound?" Sarah held her breath. Was there really a foreman watching, or was Cain bluffing with the same cold nerve he'd shown walking into this barn? One of Briggs's men shifted nervously in his saddle. Another looked toward the distant ranch house, its windows dark and revealing nothing. "This isn't over, Cain," Briggs said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Fear. "No," Cain agreed, "but it's over for tonight." The standoff stretched like a wire about to snap. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of her siblings' lives balanced on the edge of a knife. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and they'd all be dead or worse. Slowly, Briggs lowered his gun. "We'll be back," he said, holstering the weapon. With more men, with legal papers. Those children are coming with me one way or another. We'll see, Kane replied. Briggs mounted his horse, his movements sharp with frustrated rage. As he wheeled the animal around, his eyes found the barn, and for one terrible moment, Sarah was certain he could see her through the gap in the wall. Then he was gone, leading his men back into the gathering darkness, leaving only the echo of hoofbeats and the promise of violence yet to come. Kane stood motionless in the gathering dusk until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Only then did he holster his gun and turn back toward the barn. Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands shook just slightly as he removed his hat and ran fingers through graying hair. You can come out now, he said quietly. Sarah emerged from the shadows, still clutching the rifle, her siblings pressed close behind her. In the fading light, Kane looked older somehow, wearier, as if the confrontation had aged him years in the span of minutes. They'll be back, Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Kane's voice was heavy with certainty. Tomorrow night, maybe the night after. With more men, like he said. Probably with papers that'll make what he's doing look legal. Tommy stepped forward, his small face pale but determined. Mister, why are you helping us? You don't even know us. Kane knelt down, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. For a moment, he just studied Tommy's face, the stubborn set of his jaw, the way he stood protectively in front of his sisters, despite being the smallest of them all. I had a boy once, Kane said finally, about your age. Name was Daniel. He paused, his voice growing softer. Lost him and his sister to scarlet fever 7 winters ago. Lost their mother the same week. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. Not quite trust, but something close to it. Understanding, maybe. Recognition of a pain that matched her own. I'm sorry, she whispered. Kane nodded, then stood and looked at each of them in turn. You remind me of them, all of you. The way you stand together, the way you look out for each other. His voice caught slightly. The way you're not afraid to fight when you have to. Mary tugged at Sarah's skirt. Sarah, are we going to die? The question hit like a physical blow. Sarah looked down at her sister's upturned face, at the trust and fear warring in those 6-year-old eyes, and felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a mountain. No, she said firmly, we're not going to die. Kane watched this exchange, and something passed across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or admiration. She's right, he said to Mary. You're not going to die. Not on my watch. He walked to his wagon and began unloading supplies. Food, blankets, a small cook stove that could be set up inside the barn. The smell of bread and dried meat filled the air, and Sarah heard Tommy's stomach growl audibly. When did you last eat? Kane asked again. The same question he'd posed earlier. 3 days, Sarah admitted quietly. Maybe 4. We had some preserves, but Kane nodded and continued unpacking. Soon he had a small fire going in a metal basin, carefully positioned so the smoke would dissipate through cracks in the roof, rather than drift out the door. He heated beans and bacon, sliced thick pieces of bread, filled a pot with fresh water from a barrel in his wagon. The children ate like they were afraid the food might disappear, and Kane watched them with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. Pain, maybe, or memory, or both. My ranch, he said suddenly. It's got rooms nobody's used in years, good beds, windows with real glass, a kitchen with a stove that doesn't smoke. Sarah looked up from her plate. Why are you telling us this? Because Briggs was right about one thing. 4 children are worth something. Not what he thinks they're worth, but something. Kane met her eyes. Worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth keeping safe. The fire crackled softly between them, casting dancing shadows on the barn walls. Outside, full darkness had fallen, and with it came the sounds of the prairie at night, the distant howl of coyotes, the whisper of wind through grass, the subtle creaking of old wood settling in the cold. He'll come back with the law, Sarah said. Papers that say we belong to him. Kane stirred the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up toward the roof. Papers can be challenged, laws can be fought, and sometimes... He paused, glancing toward his wagon where Sarah could see the outline of a rifle in a leather scabbard. Sometimes a man has to decide what's right, regardless of what's legal. The weight of those words settled over them like a blanket. Sarah looked at her siblings, Tommy already nodding off against a pile of blankets, the twins curled together like puppies, and made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. Your ranch, she said quietly. Those empty rooms. What would we have to do to stay in them? Kane was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Just be children, he said. Just be the children you're supposed to be. They loaded the wagon in darkness, moving by feel and whispered instructions. Kane had decided they couldn't wait for morning. Briggs might come back sooner than expected, and the children needed to be somewhere safe when he did. Sarah carried Tommy, who had fallen asleep despite the danger, his small body limp and trusting in her arms. The twins walked hand in hand between her and Kane, their eyes wide but no longer quite so frightened. For the first time in weeks, they looked like children instead of hunted animals. Kane's ranch house rose from the prairie like something from a dream. 2 stories of solid timber and stone, with yellow light glowing warm in the windows. A dog barked once as they approached, then fell silent at Kane's quiet word. "Mrs. Chen," Kane called softly as they reached the porch. "We have guests." The door opened to reveal a small Chinese woman with graying hair and gentle eyes. She took one look at the children and stepped aside without question, motioning them into a kitchen that smelled of bread and coffee and safety. "The blue room," she said to Kane, her accent soft but her voice firm. "And the green one next to it. I'll heat water for baths." Sarah wanted to protest. They couldn't impose like this, couldn't burden these strangers with their troubles. But Kane caught her eye and shook his head slightly. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "We'll talk about everything tomorrow. Tonight, you're just children who need sleep and safety." Mrs. Chen led them upstairs to rooms with real beds and quilts that smelled like lavender. She helped the twins wash their faces and hands, braided their hair with gentle fingers, tucked them into bed like they were her own ran children. Sarah lingered in the doorway, watching this simple act of kindness with something like wonder. When was the last time someone had cared for them like this? When was the last time they'd been children instead of survivors? "Sarah?" Tommy's sleepy voice drifted from the other room. "Are we home now?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Home. They'd lost their home, lost everything they'd ever known, and now they were strangers in a strange place, dependent on the kindness of a man they had met only hours before. But Kane appeared beside her in the doorway, and his voice was steady when he answered Tommy's question. "Yes," he said simply. "You're home." Later, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Sarah found Kane on the front porch, staring out at the darkness where Briggs and his men had disappeared. "He'll come back," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "I know. With more men, with papers, I know." Sarah was quiet for a moment, listening to the night sounds of the prairie. In the distance, she could hear cattle lowing softly, the sound of life and security and belonging. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why risk everything for us?" Kane was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of years and loss and hard-won wisdom. "Because 7 years ago, I had everything a man could want. A wife who loved me, 2 children who thought I hung the moon, a future that stretched out bright and clean as far as I could see." He paused, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "And I couldn't save any of it. Couldn't save them." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "I'm sorry." "But tonight," Kane continued, "tonight I could save something, someone, 4 someones who reminded me what I used to be before grief made me forget." In the distance, a coyote howled, and another answered. The sound was lonely, but not empty, a call and response that spoke of connection, of pack, of belonging. "When Briggs comes back," Sarah said quietly, "we'll face him together." Kane nodded. Together. The first hint of dawn was beginning to touch the eastern horizon, painting the sky the color of hope. In a few hours, there would be decisions to make, battles to fight, papers to contest, and laws to challenge. But for now, in this moment between darkness and light, 4 orphaned children slept safely in warm beds, and a man who had forgotten how to be a father remembered what it meant to protect something worth saving. The morning star hung bright and steady above the prairie, a promise that some things endure, some things are worth fighting for, and sometimes, just sometimes, the lost can find their way home. In the blue room upstairs, Tommy stirred in his sleep and smiled, dreaming of wooden horses and endless tomorrows. And in the chair beside Sarah, Marcus Kane sat vigil against the darkness, his weathered hands steady and his heart, for the first time in 7 years, full.